Nothing like a good murder to create a good bonding experience for Joel and Ellie. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. Again, I guess we're now just done with the flashback parts of this series. We've done that. We're now on the road here. So again, there's no precursor before the credits, and we're just in. For those of you who are upset of the last week's episode, where it's like, hey, there's nothing like the game. None of this is here. You're making up this weird story. I won't get into the homophobic stuff that all exists, but this one is very much on track of being pretty close to the best of what the game is, with one small parallel. It's in the same world, same timeline, same actual moment, but we're seeing stuff that we did not see in the game, because in the game, the focal point is Joel and Ellie. You're only seeing things through their eyes. So anything that is happening around them that is not directly in front of them, they don't know. So what this episode does is, yes, continue that story, but we then see a whole part of some of the things that are happening around to kind of get to the point where all sort of converge on one. And so we get some characters that don't exist in the game, but we hear through radio that they exist. We never see them. We never know their gender, but we do know that they're around. And this sort of fleshes them out and gives them a little bit more and shows that there is a little bit of a gray area to all factions in The Last of Us game and show. So this starts off with Ellie kind of going to target practice, if you will, in the mirror. She's moving the gun around and pointing the gun. What we would, as an audience, feel like is very nerve-wracking. Like, oh my God, this poor child is playing with his gun. But she seems to be knowing what she's doing. She's moving the bullets out, cleaning the bullet out, emptying the clip, putting it back in. She seems to know her way around the gun more than what the typical novice would be. So, and as we learn, she knows her way around a gun, but in this sequence is the first time that we've seen her with it, that a little bit of the uneasiness we had with her with a weapon kind of fades away a little bit. It's like, oh no, she's at least done this enough where she knows how to handle herself if the situation comes to fold. She then goes out after playing around with the gun a little bit. They're at a gas station, and Joel is out there siphoning gas. It's the way that they're continuing their road trip, something we don't really. I can't remember if we get too under the weeds of how they keep the gas going in this car in the game. But to continue on, he's going from all these abandoned vehicles and siphoning off gas that only works for about an hour or a couple hundred miles, as opposed to when we used to fill out gas back in the day. He explains to her, like, hey, we used to go miles and miles and miles with this. Now it's a little bit more. We have to keep this up. Because again, we have to remember, Ellie has no clue of how the world worked before this. She's only a child of the outbreak. And then we get a lot of dialogue and words that pretty much are one-to-one from the game. They are driving, and Ellie is sort of finding things in the car that further explain who Bill is. We find the magazine that did sort of let us know that Bill was gay. It's here. The whole sticky line is still a part of it. We have a little fun throwaway line like, "Oh my God, how is he able to walk around with that thing?" It's fun. It's fun, and you can sort of tell that Ellie is looking more at it out of curiosity and not as of arousal. That's a note to sort of just tack away from my folks who don't know what's going on. But that's sort of to show you who Ellie is and what her orientation may perceive to be. But then they put on some Hank Williams, which then Last of Us, you don't feel that good old Southern guitar strings in the background. That's a perfect song to sort of go along and to get this montage of them driving. And then this week started learning a little bit about them. They started getting a little bit closer together. While on this road trip, they have to obviously stop and take naps. So they pull over into a road where Joel sort of gives Ellie a couple of tips about the land. It's like, there's no infected out here. There's no fungus. It's too remote. They need people to be around. So there's no fungus people out here. But she's like, can I start a fire? He's like, nope, can't start a fire. Obviously not for fungus, but clearly because there might be some humans out there. So there's people that may try to harm us. Again, she's been sheltered and in the world she doesn't know. And so this episode sort of is used to show that, yes, we have to be worried about the infected and the military, but we also have to be worried about all these factions that sort of popped up. People who are willing to do whatever and harm whomever to kind of make their way of life. And while um, most people all agree on the same thing, if you are stopping them from doing their thing, then that's when the friction becomes, and then so it becomes these pockets of factions. So that's what he's sort of at bay and protecting for. And so there's a cute little pun book that Ellie has that kind of de-escalates the situation between them all, and they all have these a bunch of heartfelt moments throughout the episode. But in that, he allows her to go to sleep, but he stands watch. He's too nervous about this area. He doesn't feel comfortable enough in this area to allow himself to fall asleep because he knows he needs to stand on watch. We learn about Tommy and how Tommy is always a dreamer. He wants to be the hero. He enlisted in the army in Desert Storm, fighting a war that Joel just doesn't really believe in. And then in the outbreak, Joel moved from Texas to Boston with Tommy, but Tommy's seeking to find a new group to be a part of, and that's how he got with the Fireflies. And now Joel's like, I don't know if he's with I don't think he's with the Fireflies now currently, but he knows that he's out there somewhere. And the last sort of bearing that he had is in the direction that they are going. But he's like, my job is I pretty much live to make sure that he's okay. With all the Tommy stuff, Ellie feels that Joe's a bit jaded and doesn't have hope. And she's like, you're gonna have a really terrible life if you don't feel any hope or have any hope or search for hope. And Joe's kind of like, well, you're young. You haven't lived a life yet. You still have hope. You don't know what you don't know. And she's like, well, you need hope to kind of go on. He's like, no, I go on for family. Which he mentioned, like, that's why he goes on for Tom. He's like, I go on for family. And she's like, well, I'm not family. He's like, oh, you're cargo. But Tess was family. And I'm doing this for Tess because I made a promise to her. So he still clearly doesn't have that bond with Ellie yet, but he's doing this in the memory of the person that he did have an affinity for. They get to a stop where they can't move on anymore. Now in the game, this is sort of different. In the game, this is Pittsburgh. So the road where they're going is slightly different. I don't know why they made a geological change, but the idea and everything else still plays the same. But it's not Pittsburgh. It's just Kansas City. The way they want to go is blocked off, so they have to get off the highway and kind of take side roads to sort of get back on the ramp because he could see underneath this truck that was blocking that it was clear path on the other side. He just needs to make his way around. So he comes off, starts going down the side streets, but then they get ambushed. All part of the game. He calls out the ambush. He sees it like a person comes out and says, oh, please help me. And he says, put on your seatbelt, Ellie. And she's like, we're going to help him? He's like, nah, that ain't happening. And then they charge ahead and someone throws something from the roof to break the windshield so he can't see anymore. And he crashes into a laundromat. The sort of shootout ensues. In that moment, he manages to get Ellie to a safe space away from the gunfire while he takes two of the people that are harming them out. And then while he is preparing to make sure that the area is clear completely, he's not up on his up and up, and someone gets to jump on him. And the third person pretty much has him dead to rights. He's choking him out with a gun. Luckily, Ellie was smart enough to keep that gun that she had earlier. And she comes out the hiding place that she was at. She shoots Brian, which is what we learned his name to be, in the back. At this point, Brian is kind of like begging and pleading for his life. He's like, oh, God, I'm so sorry. Please, we can work something out. We can work out a system. I know you're doing what you have to do. Basically, he's a kid. And some of it is lies, but some of it is him like, oh, God, these guys are going to actually murder me. He pulls out a knife, like, hey, you can have it. I'll borrow it with you. You guys can take that back. At that point, Joel grabs the gun from Ellie, and he looks both pleased that she saved his life and disappointed that she has a gun. I mean, we'll get to the disappointment part in just a moment. And it's at that point he tells her, like, hey, go back into the hole. Because we know he's about to finish this man off, and he doesn't want her to see it. And he does so. But here's the kicker, and this is what's crazy. He has another gun. He takes Ellie's gun, puts it in his pants. He has another gun, but he pulls out a knife. And I think he uses the knife because we don't hear anything. We don't hear a gunshot go off. He uses the knife to kill. I think that's a way to say, hey, I'm killing this man, but I'm doing it in a manner that she won't hear it, so this won't sort of stick with her. This won't land on her. This won't feel like that. You took this life. I'm the one who was responsible for taking this life. I think Joel did that on purpose. I'm not familiar with Yellow Jackets. I know. So I don't know Melanie Linsky well, but I know that is where she's known from. but she plays a character named Kathleen, who again is not a part of the games, but has been sort of mentioned as an off-screen character, as this. They don't use the name of the Hunters in this episode, but the faction is called the Hunters in the game, and they are a group that are neither Fireflies or Fedra. In fact, they've killed people of both. But in this, it appears that Kathleen has taken a doctor hostage, doctor who was actually responsible for her birth, but it's taken a doctor hostage because that doctor may have some information about who was responsible for killing her brother. And she believes that Henry and Sam, who are two people that are sort of on the run, are responsible for giving up information that has led to the death of her brother. And she seems to be a very calm, calculated, but ruthless. Like, she will take people out if she has to, type of situation. And in this, she is having a dialogue with the doc back and forth, saying, "Hey, what do you know?" And there's a fun back and forth that she sort of has calmly, because she's like, "I wonder if this is the cell." Because on the sign it says, "Hey, this person in the cell has a right to a lawyer, a doctor, blah blah blah." It's like, I wonder if this is the cell where my brother was killed. And at that point, the doc says, "Hey, this has gone on far enough. This needs to stop." It's like, wait, does this need to stop now, or did this need to stop before? Because what's the difference? Well, who says when this has to stop? And a gun is mentioned. She's like, "Oh, cool. That's all that is the deciding factor. What's different here? Then let's make this an even score." She puts a gun to the doc's face. But then that is when she is told to come on out by her number two, who I don't feel like we get a name, but he is the actor who voices Tommy in the game. But he lets her know that, hey, three people have been hurt and someone has killed people. And they're like, "Is it Henry and Sam?" I'm like, "No, it wasn't. We don't have a beat on them, but it wasn't Henry and Sam." And they're pretty loaded. Their truck was completely stocked and fully supplied. And Kathleen's like, "Well, this person, Henry and Sam, have radios. They have access to a radio, so they may have called in reinforcements." She's that concerned about Henry and Sam that they may have called in reinforcements. So we need to get them and stop them and kill them at all, by all means necessary. So she sends her whole crew out there. She's a pretty well stocked crew. She sends them all out there to go start banging in doors to go find both Henry and Sam, and then whoever this other person is that has killed her men. They are starting off with all housing complexes and apartments, and then they'll work their way to stores. So, needless to say, Joel and Ellie are in stores. And while they're in the store, Joel enters into like Papa mode. And he's telling Ellie that he feels at fault. He feels bad. He feels sorry that he put himself in a situation where he was in harm's way, where you felt the need that you had to go pull out a gun. And he's sorry that you had to fire a gun. He's quite sincere in this. And he's stuttering and having a hard time kind of coming up with the words to actually say that, "I failed you. And if you actually want to talk about this at all, I know what it feels like to take your first life. I know what it is to feel like shooting the first time." And he corrects. He's like, "Well, you didn't take the life, but you harmed them." He's just messing up. But his biggest thing is like, "I don't want you to feel the burden of having to go through this. I want you to be a kid. In this, you shouldn't have to worry about taking someone's life or protecting yourself. You should just be able to go be a kid, because I don't know what it possibly can feel like being a kid born and raised in this world versus being born and raised when everything was kind of normal." She then drops the bomb, which kind of explains how she was able to move around with that gun so well in the beginning, saying her first time or first rodeo with the weapon. And he's like, "Wait, what?" Federal school put her through where she knew how to maneuver around the gun. There's also a line later where she's like, "I don't want to talk about it, but I've done some things, and this isn't the first time, so I'm good. I'm good. I don't we don't need to have a talk." But in that, he starts showing her a couple of different other things with the gun, and he gives it back to her. And now he's entrusting her with it, because that sort of sheen of her innocence is kind of been lost. And he was like, "Well, I can't use them for backup and some protection if you're going to go ahead and pull the trigger, whether it be you." She goes to put it in her backpack, and he's like, "No, I'm put it in your bag, not the back pants, because you're going to shoot your ass off." So they're kind of getting a rapport with each other, where it's not necessarily loving, but they are having a good enough conversation where the wall is breaking down as to their discourse with each other. Kathleen finds Henry and Sam's sort of hideout, their previous hideout, and it is stocked with drawings of him and two superheroes. You can tell that they're African American, two superheroes uh, all over. He loves superheroes. He dresses up as superheroes, and then you see a bunch of food cans and whatnot that are screen wrapped, but it's empty. All their rations are basically gone. So at that point, Kathleen realizes that hey, Henry and Sam are out of food, so they're out. They're on the move now to look for supplies. So let's gear up all of our areas that have food and huge supplies because Henry's not going to allow Sam to not have food for a while. And it's clear that whoever Henry is to Kathleen, they know each other well. And also, a point of note here is that in the building that they are in, which was where Sam and Henry were, um, they go into another room and they see that there's sort of a sinkhole forming that's kind of bubbling up. We don't have any payoff for that in this episode, but we sure as hell will in the next. And for my folks that are a gamer, all the gamers who know, we're going to see a new infected version, a further degenerated version of the infected in the next episode. And yeah, it's gonna be a good time. The ones we're going to see as we get there are ferocious and vicious and super strong. So somebody's face might be getting ripped off. And just hold on to your butts. It's gonna be a wild time. But Kathleen says, "Cool, don't tell anybody." Even though her number two is like, "We should probably let them know." It's like, no, let's keep that secret, keep it to ourselves. We don't want to alarm anybody, but let's just go ahead and close this area off. Which means Kathleen's gonna die. She's the one who was responsible for this world, kind of probably not giving the heads up to people. Yeah, and we don't know any much about her. I feel like she's gonna die a very, very violent death, and I'm here for it. Let's get in there. We then see another scenario where they need to take a break because while they were running across the town to find a place to sort of hide out, they saw a super tall building, about 45 stories type building. Joel and Ellie decided to go there once sort of died off a little bit, and they can use the night as cover. They go there. They get halfway up. They go about 25 flights up. Joel can't go anymore, and they set up shop there to go to sleep. It is there that he is setting up and kind of like crunching glass and putting it in the doorway so that he can hear sort of an alarm. That's the way he's doing it. But it's at that point where Ellie sort of makes fun. It's like, "Are you sure you're going to even be able to hear that?" Because she's noticed that sometimes Joel's hearing is off, which is sort of a new wrinkle added to the show versus the game. Because in the game, Joel's sort of a superhero. You get shot a couple of times, you get scratched a couple of times, and then he power heals up, you put drugs in. All of that's removed because this is a real life situation. And so all the repetitive gunfire that he's had over the years sort of had an effect on his hearing. So she's like, "I'm aware. I can see it. I can see it happening. So I hope you're able to hear everything." But then she pulls out another one of those puns that has been sort of grating on Joel, but kind of breaking down that armor a little bit. It's a pretty good one. And they have a good laugh. And unlike the previous situation where he did not feel comfortable falling asleep and leaving her there. Also, remember, he didn't get any sleep, so he's probably exhausted. He actually does fall asleep and is woken up by Ellie screaming out Joel. Had to call his name twice again because coming out of sleep, but also probably not quite hearing it. Calls his name twice, and we see both Henry and Sam there holding them at gunpoint, and that is how the episode ends. Not as emotionally strong, obviously, as the last episode. And there's just a couple of tense moments. That shootout, the ambush and shootout is a pretty tense sequence and plays just like the game. Like it's right out of that. Falling in the laundry, getting to the laundromat, having her go in the hole, all of that feels right into place. And I think nothing in this episode feels like it's doing something that the game wasn't. We're just learning about Kathleen and the Hunter's leader, which we would never have had the visual evidence of because Joel and Ellie weren't directly in contact with them. So it all fits within the world. But we can see that we got some fun things happening on the horizon and some very sad things happening on the horizon. Yeah, you guys thought episode 3 was emotional. These next few ones after this is going to be a wild punch in the gut. But I'm excited to meet Henry and Sam. I'm excited to see how much further we kind of go through Kathleen's involvement in all of this. If the Kansas City area is a lot like the Pittsburgh area in the game, we won't spend much more time here. kind of have maybe an episode and a half before we kind of move on to the next piece. So I'm interested to see what they come up with to kind of create this. But I think the biggest takeaway from this is that the connection between Joel and Ellie is growing stronger. They're now actually having laughs together. Joel feels comfortable enough with her to tell her secrets. Like the whole Tommy thing is something that he would not have told her at the beginning of this, but now he feels comfortable enough to be like, hey, this, and this. He showed genuine concern for her. Yes, he says that she's just cargo, but it's clear that he had enough affinity for her that he was concerned that he may have rubbed off and taken some of the innocence off of her and made her just a cold-blooded killer like he is. He has seen what that does to people. She even asked him at a point in this, hey, have you ever killed innocent people? He kind of pauses for a moment. You can read on his face that the answer is yes, but he doesn't want her to see him any differently than what she does. So he's kind of like, nah, good. But it's clear that in this world, everybody has done something a little messed up to kind of get by. I think that's what The Last of Us as a whole, part one and part two of the games, um, the road between being quote unquote the good guy and the bad guy is very, very, very small. Depending on what side of the whatever the topic is, whatever the point is, depending on what side of that you fall on, depending on in the other person's eyes which way you fall. And that's sort of always been sort of this gray area with Last of Us, which allows to have some complicated characters and some complicated moments that make this world so rich to sort of live in. I do wonder, and I hope somebody's tracking this, how high the Hank Williams Alone and Forsaken Spotify spins go up to, because it's about to crank up some high numbers after tonight. What did you guys think about this fourth episode of The Last of Us called Please Hold My Hand? You can leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have the podcast with the same name. That's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.